Welcome, everyone. I am so glad you are joining us today because we are unpacking a topic that is heavy,
Mhm.
it's deeply personal, and frankly, it is incredibly common.
Even if it's not talked about nearly enough in our daily lives.
Right, exactly. We are taking a comprehensive deep dive into overcoming pornography addiction. And if you are listening to this, whether you're here for yourself or, because you are trying to understand what a loved one is going through, you are in the right place.
It is a profoundly difficult topic.
Mm.
And I want to start by speaking directly to you, the listener. If you are in the middle of this struggle right now, we really want to validate just how exhausting and isolating this battle feels.
Yeah, it thrives in isolation.
It really does.
Yeah.
The shame that surrounds pornography addiction thrives in silence and shadows.
Yeah.
So simply by being here, simply by pressing play and choosing to engage with this material today, you are already taking a massive, courageous step toward the light. My goal today is to approach this material through the lens of a compassionate therapist and mentor. I want to provide you with tools for long-term healing rather than judgment.
Okay, well, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to thoroughly explore a specific, actionable framework for healing that's outlined in the book, Finally Free, Fighting for Purity with the Power of Grace by Heath Lambert.
Which is a fascinating text.
It is. But before we really get into the weeds, we do need to set a clear, impartial framework for our discussion today. This source text approaches the issue of addiction from a deeply Christian biblical perspective.
Right, that's the author's lens.
Exactly. And as your guides today, we are going to impartially report on the author's theological framework. We are not here to take sides, and we are not here to endorse specific religious viewpoints. Instead, our goal is to unpack this text to reveal its profound, compassionate, and highly therapeutic insights into the emotional and psychological roots of addiction.
That is a crucial distinction. What is so deeply valuable about the author's approach is that he isn't trying to drown the reader in terrifying statistics about the porn industry.
Which are out there.
They are out there, yes. Or lecture you about the neurological damage it causes, though those realities are entirely scientifically valid. Instead, he is offering a practical, completely shame-free action plan. We are going to look at the psychological mechanisms he is tapping into here.
Because we want to understand how you can rebuild self-control.
Right. Self-control, emotional health, and a positive relationship with your own sexuality, all without the crushing weight of self-condemnation.
And we promise you a highly structured, deeply informative journey today. We are going to explore the core concepts across the author's 9 chapters. We are going to extract exactly 10 key takeaways from each chapter organically. Plus, we will make sure you walk away with one concrete, actionable practice step for every single concept we discuss.
By the end of this deep dive, you are going to have a massive toolkit.
You really are. So let's jump right into the foundational concept. Chapter 1, the idea of grace over shame. The author makes a bold claim right out of the gate that sheer willpower, or simply having information about how bad porn is, will never be enough to cure the addiction.
No, willpower depletes.
Exactly. He argues that true recovery requires grace. But how does he define that, and how does that translate psychologically?
Well, he defined it in 2 distinct parts: forgiving grace and transforming grace. And this is where we see the psychology of shame being systematically dismantled. Let's look at what happens when an addict relapses. The immediate aftermath is almost always a barrage of internal mental punishment.
Right. They tell themselves they are disgusting, they are weak, they are worthless.
And that they will never change. But the author makes a fascinating observation here. He points out that this self-punishment, while it might feel like genuine repentance, is actually surprisingly self-centered.
Wait, beating yourself up is self-centered? That sounds counterintuitive. Can you unpack why that is? Because when you feel guilty, it feels like you are doing the right thing by being hard on yourself.
It does feel that way. But think about where your focus is. When you are trapped in a cycle of self-flagellation, you are keeping your focus entirely on yourself, your own feelings, your own failure, your own ego. True recovery requires shifting that focus outward.
So let's run through the 10 key takeaways from this first chapter. Number 1 is that information about the harms of porn does not cure the addiction. Grace and power are required.
Yes. And number 2 introduces forgiving grace, which cancels the emotional and spiritual debt of the behavior. If you don't cancel that debt, your mind cannot stop obsessing over the failure.
Which leads to takeaway 3. Transforming grace provides the active power to build new habits. It's not just wiping the slate clean, it's giving you the energy to move forward.
Exactly. And takeaway 4 is crucial from a neuroscience perspective. Transformation begins the exact moment you truly believe change is possible. Belief actually rewires the brain's expectations and dopamine baselines. If you believe you are doomed to fail, you will.
That makes total sense. Takeaway 5 is about that shift we just mentioned. Repentance is a psychological shift from self-centeredness to God-centeredness, or an outward focus.
And takeaway 6 is that confessing sin is simply admitting the reality of your struggle out loud. Secrecy is the oxygen of addiction. When you speak it out loud, you cut off the supply.
Right. Takeaway 7 is that affirming forgiveness breaks the paralyzing cycle of shame. You have to actively agree that your slate can be wiped clean.
Which brings us to 8. Requesting grace is an active pursuit of strength, not passive wishing. You are engaging in the fight.
Takeaway 9 really hits hard. Self-punishing mental talk is a form of self-centeredness, not genuine healing. It just keeps you stuck in the mud of your own ego.
And the final takeaway for this chapter, number 10. True hope is birthed when grace entirely replaces despair.
That is a perfect summary of the internal shift, and it leads directly into the first concrete step to practice. The author calls this the 2R prayer, CAR.
It stands for confess, affirm, request.
Right. The application is brilliant in its simplicity. When you are in that immediate moment of failure, instead of spiraling into that self-centered punishment, you pause. You confess the act out loud. You ask for transforming grace. And here's the kicker. You refuse to stop this active mental process until you genuinely believe a clean slate is possible.
From a clinical perspective, that is a brilliant cognitive behavioral interrupt. You are stopping the rumination dead in its tracks and replacing it with a structured, outward-facing action.
You are retraining your neural pathways in real time.
Exactly.
That cognitive interrupt is a perfect bridge into Chapter 2, where the author observes something else. You mentioned interrupting the shame spiral right after a failure, but what happens when the tears start flowing? This blew my mind. The author points out a profound distinction between the types of sadness someone feels after a relapse.
The anatomy of sorrow.
Yes. He calls it worldly sorrow versus godly sorrow. To illustrate this, he shares the contrasting stories of two men, Dave and Brian. Both were caught in their addiction. Both ended up sitting in a counselor's office next to their devastated wives. Both of them wept bitterly, sobbing, begging for forgiveness. From the outside, they looked identical.
But the outcomes were entirely different.
Completely. Only Dave actually changed his behavior and saved his marriage. Ryan eventually went right back to the addiction, lost his family, and ended up in jail. The question is, why?
What's fascinating here is the underlying psychology of crying over getting caught versus crying over the act itself. The author explains that Ryan cried over the consequences. He was experiencing worldly sorrow. He was mourning the loss of his reputation, his comfort, and the ease of his life.
He was sad for himself.
Precisely. Dave, however, cried over the broken relationship with his core values and his God. He was experiencing godly sorrow.
So let's extract the 10 key takeaways from Chapter 2. Number 1 is a big wake-up call. Tears and emotional breakdowns do not guarantee behavioral change. You can cry a river in a therapist's office and still relapse the very next day.
And takeaway 2 explains why. Worldly sorrow is merely mourning the loss of comfort, reputation, or access to the addiction. It is the grief of being caught.
Which leads to number 3. Worldly sorrow leads to a cycle of repeated acting out because the core selfishness remains completely intact. It's still entirely about the self.
Right. Takeaway 4 shifts to the alternative. Godly sorrow focuses outward, mourning the broken relationship with God and core values.
And number 5, godly sorrow is earnest. It sustains the long-term fight weeks and years later, long after the initial tears have dried up.
Takeaway 6 is that godly sorrow actively seeks to clear the slate through radical honesty. A person experiencing worldly sorrow will trickle truth you. They will only admit to exactly what you have evidence for.
Yes, trying to manage the fallout. Takeaway 7 is that godly sorrow hates the addiction itself, seeing it as a poison, not just the discomfort of being caught.
Takeaway 8 is that it produces a healthy, sobering alarm about moral and emotional damage. It's a true wake-up call.
Number 9, godly sorrow desperately longs to restore the relationships the addiction fractured. It moves toward connection.
And takeaway 10, perhaps the most telling psychological indicator. Godly sorrow fully accepts the consequences and justice of past actions without defensiveness. They don't make excuses or play the victim.
Which leads us to the step to practice for Chapter 2, the sorrow audit. The next time you feel sad after a relapse, you need to sit down and write out the real reasons for your sadness. You have to be brutally honest with yourself. Are you just sad you got caught? Are you dreading the awkwardness of apologizing? Or are you genuinely mourning the damage to your soul and your loved ones?
Doing a sorrow audit forces mindfulness. It strips away the performative aspect of crying and forces you to confront your own internal motives. That confrontation is the absolute first step toward developing genuine empathy for the people your actions are hurting.
That empathy leads perfectly into Chapter 3, where the author tackles accountability. The core premise here is simple but devastating. Isolation feeds addiction. But the author goes a step further and details why most accountability groups fail miserably and how to fix them.
The coffee shop analogy.
Yes, he paints a picture of the typical accountability group. A bunch of guys sitting around a coffee shop once a week. They sip their lattes, admit they failed a few days ago, feel a bit bad about it, get a sympathetic pat on the back, and then go out and try again.
From a therapeutic standpoint, that coffee shop scenario is a ritual of delayed confession, not an actual intervention. Willpower in isolation fails. We know this. Humans are social creatures.
And so let's dive into the 10 takeaways for Chapter 3 to see how to actually fix this. Takeaway 1 is just that. Willpower in isolation fails. Humans need community to restore them gently.
Takeaway 2 is that accountability is vital, but it cannot be the only tool in your arsenal. It is just one piece of a larger puzzle.
And number 3 is the absolute major breakthrough. You must reach out during the fog of temptation, not just report failures at the end of the week. You have to pick up the phone when the urge hits.
Takeaway 4 warns about who you are calling. Accountability partners must have actual maturity and a track record of victory in this area. You can't put 5 actively drowning guys in a room and expect them to save each other.
That just normalizes the drowning. Takeaway 5. It is highly effective to include someone with recognized mentoring or spiritual authority, someone you respect and maybe fear disappointing just a little bit. That respect creates psychological friction when a craving hits.
Takeaway 6 provides a practical guardrail. Avoid overly explicit or graphic details in confession, as they can inadvertently trigger the accountability partner. Keep it honest, but general.
Number 7 is about the dynamic. The struggler must proactively initiate confession. The mentor shouldn't have to interrogate them. If they have to drag the truth out of you, you are still hiding.
Takeaway 8 is that true accountability requires actual verification software, check-ins, not just blind trust. Addiction rewires the brain to lie. It is part of the disease's self-preservation mechanism. Verification protects the relationship from deceit.
Takeaway 9. The mentor must be willing to invest time and answer calls throughout the week. It's an emergency responder role.
And takeaway 10 brings it home. Recovery via accountability requires a long-term marathon commitment. The brain takes time to rewire.
So the step to practice here is setting up the mentor meeting. You need to make a list of mature, victorious mentors in your life. Ask one of them to partner with you and set up a weekly meeting with a strict, proactive agenda.
And if you are the one asking for help, remember to approach this mentor humbly. You are asking for a significant investment of their time and emotional energy. But within a healthy community, burden sharing is a fundamental expression of connection.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. Even with a mentor, the author insists on the necessity of radical action in Chapter 4. He looks at the biblical metaphor of amputation, the idea that if your eye causes you to sin, you should gouge it out. Now, obviously, he is not advocating physical self-harm.
No, of course not.
He is talking about environment design and aggressively cutting off access. To explain this, he uses the brilliant analogy of frog and toad and the cookies.
I love this analogy because it perfectly illustrates the limits of willpower.
Right. So frog and toad bake these amazing cookies, and they eat so many they get sick, but they can't stop. So they put the cookies in a box, they tie the box with string, and they put the box on a high shelf. They think they've solved the problem, but Toad points out the fatal flaw.
They could just climb up, untie the string, and open the box.
Exactly. As long as they still want the cookies and the cookies are in the house, they will eventually eat them. They finally have to go outside and throw the cookies to the birds.
This perfectly illustrates the necessity of external barriers, but also their limitations.
So let's look at the 10 key takeaways for Chapter 4. Number 1. Keeping the addiction easily accessible guarantees eventual failure because your willpower is a finite, depletable resource.
Takeaway 2 is the amputation metaphor itself. It means taking aggressive, immediate steps to cut off supply. Treat the addiction as a life or death threat.
Number 3 acknowledges the pain. Radical steps feel painful and inconvenient, like giving up a smartphone. but they choose long-term life over short-term destruction.
Takeaway 4 shifts internally. The battle begins in the thought life. You must uproot the desire, not just block the screen. As Toad pointed out, throwing the cookies to the birds doesn't stop you from wanting cookies.
Right, if the fantasy starts in your mind, the battle has already begun. Takeaway 5. You must practice immediate repentance or redirection the exact second a craving enters your mind.
Takeaway 6 suggests a tool for that. Memorizing core truths or scriptures acts as an active weapon against the lies of the urge. It's cognitive reframing.
Number 7. You must radically eliminate unmonitored alone time. Addiction thrives in isolation.
Takeaway 8 focuses on access. Restrict physical and financial access. Hand over devices, remove TVs, have someone monitor bank accounts so you can't secretly buy access to premium content.
Takeaway 9. Utilize technology like filters and monitoring software relentlessly across all devices.
And takeaway 10 is the key psychological insight. External blocks don't change the heart, but they buy the time required for internal transformation. They create friction, which gives your prefrontal cortex time to wake up and override the limbic system's craving.
So the step to practice is what we call the access purge. You need to identify the specific times, places, and devices where you typically act out and implement one radical block today. Hand over your admin passwords to your mentor so you physically cannot bypass the filter. Take the action today before the urge hits.
It's entirely about outsmarting your future self. You have to build the concrete walls while you are thinking clearly.
Building those walls naturally brings us to Chapter 5, the healing power of confession. The core information here is that keeping the habit a secret actively prevents healing.
Secrets keep you sick.
Exactly. The author provides a vital framework for how, when, and to whom to confess. He uses 2 very different stories to illustrate the dangers on both ends of the spectrum. First, the story of Tom. Tom had actually stopped watching porn. He was sober. But he refused to tell his wife about his years of past addiction because he didn't want to cause conflict or hurt her feelings.
Which sounds noble on the surface, but it's actually deeply destructive to intimacy.
Right. On the flip side, he shares a cautionary tale of a man who felt so guilty and burned by his internal lustful thoughts that he confessed them to a random female friend of his, which completely traumatized and horrified her.
These 2 stories illustrate the perilous tightrope of confession.
So let's go through the 10 takeaways for Chapter 5. Number 1, concealing the addiction actively prevents emotional prosperity and true healing, even if you are technically sober.
Takeaway 2, in Tom's case, honest confession is the painful but absolutely necessary pathway to mercy and restored trust.
Takeaway 3 explains why. Unconfessed behavior creates an invisible, damaging wall in intimate relationships. The partner almost always senses that a part of their spouse is hidden.
Number 4 gets to the root. The fear of confessing is usually rooted in pride, self-protection, and ego. It masks itself as trying to protect the other person.
Takeaway 5 introduces a crucial boundary concept from the second story. You must confess to everyone directly impacted by your actions. The author calls this the circle of your sin.
And takeaway 6 is the flip side. Do not confess to those who are unaffected. This causes unnecessary trauma. Dumping your guilt onto innocent bystanders just to feel relief is deeply selfish.
Number 7. Expect and accept the emotional shock, anger, and consequences from the betrayed without defensiveness. You do not get to dictate how they process the pain you just handed them.
Takeaway 8 is highly recommended clinical advice. Bring a wise third party, like a mentor or therapist, to help mediate a difficult confession. They provide a safety net when emotions spike.
Takeaway 9. Be thorough about the scope of the problem, how long it's been going on, but avoid graphic details that traumatize the listener. They don't need the specific images in their head.
And takeaway 10. Take 100% responsibility. Never shift the blame onto a spouse's behavior, their appearance, or a lack of intimacy. The choice was yours alone.
The step to practice here is writing the confession roster. Write down the names of the people directly affected by your secret. Discuss that list with your mentor to ensure you are applying the circle of sin rule correctly, and then schedule the necessary confessions.
It is terrifying, yes.
Yeah.
But confession forces the issue into the light, where shame completely loses its power to control you.
Once you've brought it into the light, you still have to deal with the daily reality of your own brain. This brings us to Chapter 6, the neuroscience of focus. The author explores this using Proverbs 5. He explains a concept backed by modern neuroscience. You cannot defeat porn by trying not to think about it. You must replace the focus.
Ironic process theory.
Yes. He tells this funny but relatable story of his ugly 1987 Oldsmobile Cutlass Sierra. It had terrible, squeaky burgundy seats. The more he tried not to think about how much he hated that car, the more he thought about it. The only way he successfully stopped obsessing over the Oldsmobile was when he started thinking about buying his new Toyota Camry.
You have to replace the object of your focus.
But he contrasts this lighthearted car story with the deeply tragic story of a man named Jamie. Jamie's addiction started casually in college, but Jamie ended up in his 60s, divorced, completely alienated from his daughters, living in a basement surrounded by porn, and completely incapable of real, meaningful human connection.
Jamie's story is the grim reality of where the neurological pathways of addiction inevitably lead.
Let's extract the 10 takeaways from Chapter 6. Number 1. As the Oldsmobile story shows, trying not to think about an urge only reinforces it in your brain. You must replace the thought entirely.
Takeaway 2, looking at Jamie's life. Addiction promises sweetness and relief, but ultimately brings bitterness, isolation, and relational death. It's a counterfeit intimacy.
Takeaway 3. Viewing porn inherently uses and degrades the actors on screen, turning human beings into disposable objects for consumption rather than showing them compassion.
Number 4. The addiction ruthlessly consumes a person's time, physical strength, and life potential. It drains your ambition.
Takeaway 5 is why Jamie's story is so vital. The most devastating penalties of this addiction accumulate and strike late in life. The isolation compounds over decades.
Takeaway 6. True human sexuality is designed for exclusive intimacy. It's designed to build trust over time, not to be fractured and shared with strangers.
Takeaway 7. Real beauty ages and deepens with character, unlike the artificial, disposable, permanently youthful fantasy presented on a screen.
Number 8 is the solution. Recovery requires actively and deliberately refocusing mental and emotional energy onto your spouse. You have to rebuild the neural pathway, linking arousal to a real human being.
Takeaway 9 is a stern warning. Wives or spouses should never be used as accountability cops. It destroys the romantic and egalitarian dynamic of the marriage.
And takeaway 10 is for the singles. Marriage is not a cure for lust. For singles, celibacy frees that immense sexual and emotional energy to be channeled into ultimate purpose and community building.
The step to practice here is the energy redirect. If you are married, make a list of 5 things you genuinely love about your spouse and do 3 small, unexpected acts of service for them today. If you're single, direct that energy outward into serving a community group or pouring deeply into a friendship.
This step moves the brain from a state of passive, selfish consumption, which is porn, into a state of active creation and connection. You are retraining your brain to find dopamine in service.
Service and connection lead us into what might be the most challenging section of the book. Chapter 7, The Root of Entitlement. This is a controversial but profound therapeutic point. He argues that addiction is not just about having an empty love tank or loneliness. At its core, it is rooted in arrogance.
That is a tough pill to swallow for a lot of people.
It really is. He uses the story of Diotrephes from a biblical text, a man who simply loved to be first and demanded his way. To bring it into a modern context, he shares the story of Tim. Tim actually managed to quit porn through sheer willpower. But in the process of getting sober, he became incredibly critical, harsh, and arrogant toward his wife.
He traded one form of selfishness for another.
Exactly. Let's look at the 10 takeaways from Chapter 7. Number 1. At its core, porn addiction is fueled by arrogance, entitlement, and selfish ambition. I want what I want right now.
Takeaway 2. Treating addiction merely as a reaction to an empty love tank misses the critical component of ego.
Number 3. Addiction demands self-gratification in absolute defiance of core values and the well-being of loved ones. It is inherently selfish.
Takeaway 4. You cannot simultaneously indulge in this secret addiction and practice genuine humility. The two states are mutually exclusive.
Takeaway 5 is where the hope comes in. Recognizing the selfish root of the behavior actually releases the power to change it. You move from being a helpless victim to an empowered agent of change. You can choose to be humble.
Number 6. Reflecting on how much grace and unmerited favor you've received in your own life fosters that true humility.
Takeaway 7 points out a blind spot. Addicts often hyper-focus on their addiction, blinding them to their other toxic character flaws. Like Tim becoming an emotional tyrant.
Which brings us to 8. True recovery involves addressing all areas of selfishness, like being overly critical or lazy. Sobriety isn't the ultimate goal. Becoming a whole, empathetic human is.
Takeaway 9. Every second spent on the addiction is time stolen from serving others.
And takeaway 10. Overcoming the habit requires actively prioritizing the needs and interests of others above your own baseline desires.
The step to practice for tackling this entitlement is the service pivot. Identify one non-porn related character flaw you need to fix. Maybe you are incredibly impatient with your kids. Commit to 4 specific ways you will serve others this week. When an urge for porn hits, pivot and execute one of those acts of service instead.
This is a masterclass in behavioral replacement. You are forcing the physiological energy of a craving through a pathway of altruism. It builds your self-worth based on contribution rather than consumption.
I love how actionable that is. Now, moving to chapter 8, the author addresses the antidote to greed. He posits that the opposite of addiction is not just abstinence. Abstinence is just a white-knuckled void. The true living opposite of addiction is gratitude.
The psychology of greed versus gratitude is one of the most powerful concepts in the text.
He shares the story of Dustin, a man whose recovery was completely stalled. Dustin was sober, but he was miserable. He was constantly obsessing over the images he couldn't look at. He found that learning to be actively thankful was the missing key that unlocked actual freedom.
Let's break down the 10 takeaways for Chapter 8. Takeaway 1. True purity is not just the absence of immorality, it is the active presence of thanksgiving.
Takeaway 2. The psychological root of sexual addiction is a greedy heart that relentlessly wants what it doesn't have. It's looking for the next novel stimulus.
Number 3. Lust creates a perpetual, exhausting state of discontentment and restlessness. It promises satisfaction, but only delivers hunger.
Takeaway 4. Gratitude is the direct psychological opposite and the ultimate antidote to greed. You literally cannot feel genuine gratitude and greedy lust at the exact same time. They use competing neural networks.
Takeaway 5. Addiction trades the joy of your actual real life for a counterfeit, impossible, and ultimately hollow fantasy.
Number 6. Addicts fail because they falsely believe only the addiction can provide them with happiness or relief.
Takeaway 7. Lust steals joy because it is a void that can never be full or satisfied. As soon as you consume it, the dopamine crashes and demands more.
Takeaway 8. Gratitude, on the other hand, fuels gladness by compounding your appreciation for what is already present in your life.
Number 9. Giving thanks in all circumstances serves as a powerful offensive weapon against sudden urges. It shifts the brain's perspective instantly from, what am I missing, to, look at all that I have.
And takeaway 10. Unlike the fleeting hit of porn, true joy compounds over time as you learn to appreciate your actual relationships and life circumstances, flaws and all.
The step to practice for this is simple, but incredibly powerful. The gratitude list.
Yes. Write down 10 specific things you are grateful for right now. Keep it with you, in your wallet or on your phone. The exact moment a greedy urge strikes, pull it out and read it.
By doing that, you force the brain to pull up actual data points of goodness in your real life. These real memories compete directly with the artificial fantasy the addiction is trying to feed you. It grounds you in reality.
We have made it to the final core section, Chapter 9, the ultimate connection. The core information here ties everything we've discussed together. Recovery cannot just be about fixing a bad habit so you can go back to living a normal, comfortable life. It must be about moving toward an ultimate relationship and purpose.
For the author, operating from his biblical framework, this means a dynamic relationship with Jesus.
Right. He relays the story of the crowds who followed Jesus around just because they wanted free bread. They wanted full stomachs, completely missing the point of connecting with the person standing right in front of them.
This raises an incredibly important question about how we view the purpose of our own healing. Let's look at the 10 final takeaways here. Takeaway 1. Seeking recovery solely to fix your problem treats a higher power or your therapy program like a cosmic vending machine.
You put in prayers, you expect a sobriety token. It completely misses the point of a relationship. Takeaway 2. Overcoming the habit should be the natural byproduct of seeking a deeper, ultimate spiritual or purposeful connection.
Takeaway 3. Your identity and your relationship with a higher purpose must be bigger than your struggle. You cannot let recovering addict be your entire identity.
Number 4. Frustration with recovery often stems from wanting instant relief from the symptoms instead of desiring the slow, methodical work of true transformation.
Takeaway 5. A dynamic relationship drives out darkness naturally, just as turning on a light in a room dispels shadows. You don't have to fight the dark with your fists.
That is a beautiful analogy. Takeaway 6. You cannot simultaneously focus your heart intensely on your highest values and act out in addiction.
Number 7. True connection requires two-way communication. Listening, which means reading texts and reflecting on values, and speaking through prayer or vocal processing.
Takeaway 8 explains the neuroscience of that. Praying or speaking out loud physically prevents the brain from drifting into the silent visual world of fantasy during an urge. It engages the motor cortex and language centers.
Takeaway 9. Praying or reciting the literal words of a sacred or grounding text keeps your focus anchored and aligns your desires with your stated values.
And finally, takeaway 10. Singing or reciting truths with physical vocal energy can effectively warm and revive a cold, numb, or exhausted heart. It brings your physical body into the fight against your mind.
It absolutely does.
And that leads us to our final step to practice, the out loud connection. Find a deeply meaningful text, a scripture, a poem, a statement of your core values. When you are tempted, read it aloud. Speak your thoughts out loud. Use your physical voice to break the silent cycle of cravings.
Do not underestimate the power of your own voice to interrupt a craving. It pulls you out of the fantasy and back into the room you're standing in.
So, what does this all mean? We have journeyed through an incredibly dense, actionable framework today. It is abundantly clear that overcoming pornography addiction is not just about stopping a bad habit through sheer grit. It is about rebuilding a human life from the ground up. It requires a life characterized by outward-focused humility, deep gratitude, authentic human connection, and profound grace.
Before we completely wrap up, I do want to briefly highlight a vital note the author includes in the appendix, written specifically for spouses and families. If you are listening to this, and you are the partner of someone fighting this addiction, the text is unequivocal, and so is the clinical psychology. You are not to blame for the addict's choices.
That is so deeply important to hear.
It is. Your physical appearance, your age, or your behavior has absolutely nothing to do with their lust or their actions. The addiction is about their internal mechanism of greed, not your inadequacy. Your healing requires setting firm boundaries, pursuing your own support network, and giving yourself the grace to process your own profound betrayal trauma.
Thank you for making sure we included that. To you, the listener, we want to acknowledge the heavy emotional lifting you've just done by exploring this deep dive with us today. Whether you're taking these tools, the Karar prayer, the Access Purge, the gratitude list, and applying them to your own life, or using them to understand and support a friend, remember that compassion paired with concrete, actionable steps is the key to unlocking the door to healing.
I want to leave you with a final reflection to mull over as you go about the rest of your day. We so often think of freedom as the ability to do whatever we want, whenever we want, without any restrictions. But based on the deep dive we've done today, what if true freedom isn't the absence of boundaries at all? What if true freedom is actually the presence of a purpose so captivating and a connection so deep that the things that once enslaved you simply lose their appeal?
What a brilliant, provocative thought to end on. True freedom is a captivating purpose. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey of learning, empathy, and discovery today. Be kind to yourselves, take those practical steps, keep seeking knowledge, and we will catch you on the next deep dive.